story in today's Irish Times, which reveals that the Gardaí had told the Minister for Justice, Michael McDowell, that there would be no prosecution against Frank Connolly before Mr. McDowell made his controversial Dáil statement and leaked documents to the Irish Independent newspaper. Paul Cullen of the Irish Times has been covering this story for his newspaper, and he joins us now. Paul, good morning to you.
Good morning, Eamon.
Paul, I'm not sure what to make of the news that Mr. McDowell knew before he engaged in this smear campaign that there was going to be no prosecution. Most of us suspected that anyway, did we not?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, he said as much as far as I understand in the Dáil. I think my colleague's story today adds a bit more flesh to that and provides some documentary detail about the kind of meetings that he had with Atlantic Philanthropies, at which he gave information about the Garda file concerning Frank Connolly.
Now, Paul, you wrote about Frank last Saturday in your newspaper, and I want to talk to you about that piece because it struck me as unusual at the time. The first thing you wrote is that you described Frank Connolly, and I quote you, as an ideologically driven Republican journalist. What does that mean?
I think, I don't know if you've read a recent book about we're featuring interviews with Irish journalists.
Yes, I'm in it.
That's right, of course you are. If you look that up,
I didn't read it.
Yeah,
I'm in it.
If you look that up, Frank says as much. He traces his origins and his beliefs, and says that he believes in the Republican ideal and in equality and justice, and says that he was motivated to write. I'm paraphrasing here, but to write about journalism as a means of basically looking, I suppose, at power structures in society and examining the lives of the wealthy and powerful and the abuses that they might carry out.
Mr. Michael McDowell would describe himself as an ideologically driven Republican as well.
I think he probably would, and I think actually today's article in the Irish Times mentions that. He traces his lineage back to 1916, as politicians frequently do.
Paul, I have been reading Frank Connolly's journalism for 15 years at least. I've never detected in the journalism, as opposed to the sort of thought process when he was younger, any Republican bias whatsoever. I mean, he's renowned, surely, for his investigative journalism, and no element of that has involved republicanism, has it? I mean, the Garda corruption in Donegal we'd all disapprove of. You wouldn't have to be a Republican to disapprove of that. And the corruption in the planning process involving Ray Burke, councillors and wealthy developers is surely an all-party matter.
Yeah, I'd like to take the issue maybe a little more broadly than picking on one person as you're doing there. I mean, obviously it was the Republic with a small R, as I wrote it in the article, but journalists do two things. First of all, if they're writing about something, they report on the facts of what happened, when, where, and so on. And they should do that accurately and comprehensively. I think we'd all agree on that. But they also have some discretion, and not enough, I would say, to choose what they write about. And what I was saying in that is that Frank has chosen in his career to write about subjects which are of interest to him. So he's written about Northern Ireland, he's written about abuse of power by the Gardaí, he's written about abuse of power by corrupt politicians. So that's his agenda. He lays it out there, and I think that tallies with my description of him in the article. Okay, you go on to say that at times, though, his ideological zeal, which you've referred to in the previous paragraph, led him to running stories that weren't true, such as the fiasco surrounding the Dennis Starry O'Brien allegation against Bertie Ahern. Now, the Dennis Starry O'Brien allegation, Mr. Ahern took an action and won it. But running stories that weren't true, or a story? There is no other story in Frank Connolly's portfolio that I'm aware of that's like the Dennis Starry O'Brien allegation. I think there are. Well, no, there's no other story like that, obviously.
What other stories were driven by his ideological zeal that weren't true?
Again, I'd say, Eamon, and I think you might be aware of this, is that when we get it wrong in the business of journalism, and we do get it wrong, and I get it wrong, and you get it wrong, and so on, it's often because we want a story to be true.
Yeah, but where is the evidence?
Because we want a story.
Where is the evidence to back up your assertion in the Irish Times last Saturday that his ideological zeal led him to running stories that weren't true?
That's my assessment.
Well, which stories are you referring to?
I'm talking about Dennis Terry O'Brien.
But that's only one. You said stories plural.
Okay, well, I accept. If you wish, I should have adduced a second one, but no, there's only one there.
Oh, well, let me go on then. Dermot Ahern, you say, and it's a very interesting piece of information that wasn't generally in the public domain, described Frank Connolly as a dangerous bastard. He described him, as you point out in your piece, as such in 1997. And he goes on to tell Joseph Murphy Jr. That Frank is a member of the IRSP/INLA. Now, Mr. Ahern is the foreign minister. He was the guy who went to London to check out the veracity of the corruption stories for Bertie Ahern, allegedly. In 1997, Frank Connolly hadn't written any story about Starry O'Brien. So, as long ago as 1997, Paul, the government regarded Frank Connolly, one of the outstanding investigative journalists in the country, as a dangerous bastard. I wonder why.
Yeah, that's my point, and I think in another article I wrote that the knives were out for the. I think in the start of that article, in fact, that I wrote that the knives were out for the centre from the very start, and that was because Frank Connolly was involved. It's not for me to speculate why, but let me just point out as well that Dermot Ahern, he didn't deny making those remarks to Joseph Murphy, but he said he couldn't recollect them when he was giving evidence.
We know what that usually means, don't we, Paul?
Well.
You've been in the tribunals long enough.
That's your judgment call there, but
yes. You've been watching the tribunals and you've reported them with Frank long enough to know that memory failure is one of the common symptoms.
It was a very telling piece of evidence. I think both of us agree on that.
Yes.
And it shows from how far back knowledge among senior politicians was the level of knowledge there was, or claimed knowledge about Frank, and the kind of views that there were.
Yeah.
And I think it explains a lot of what happened subsequently.
Well, let me just move on to the piece, to continue with the piece you wrote last Saturday. You say the Centre for Public Inquiry itself has had a quiet first year. It has produced two reports. The first dealt with controversial developments opposite Trim Castle, while the second examined the safety concerns about the Corrib gas pipeline. Critics noted that the Corrib issue is currently one of Sinn Féin's favourite hobby horses. Now, when I read that, Paul, I sat up in my chair with a bolt. Sinn Féin are of no consequence at all in the Corrib pipeline issue. It is the Rossport people and many others who are concerned about this, and on this programme we've highlighted the campaign, and Sinn Féin has barely entered the equation. But there's a linkage here that's troubling, because Mr McDougall has asserted, as have others, that the Public Inquiry was going to be a Sinn Féin intelligence gathering unit or a Sinn Féin front. It's outrageous, is it not, to link the Corrib gas line pipeline report, which was commendable and accurate, with Sinn Féin and with this story.
I don't think that the Sinn Féin involvement in the Rossport controversy has been negligible. And I don't think, for example, Enda Kenny would agree with you on that. Maybe you wouldn't agree with him.
Who?
Enda Kenny,
was ducking and diving. Enda Kenny's a powerful politician who was ducking and diving on the issue.
Yeah, I think Sinn Féin has been quite prominent in the campaign. There's no reason why they shouldn't be.
But the inference of what you've written, when you add all of these things together, this is confirmation that this is an ideological driven, a Republican, ideologically driven, to look at the Corrib gas field. The Corrib gas field has involved people from SIPTU, the trade union movement, Fine Gael, all strands of engineers, all strands of the community in Mayo, and has had national support, and it's an outrage that people are generally agreed upon. It's nothing at all to do with Sinn Féin, has it, Paul?
Oh, I disagree. I think I've already said why. I think the Sinn Féin involvement has been quite prominent been quite important. Sinn Féin is very well organised. I don't think it extends to the 5 men who went to jail, but certainly in the campaign to get their release, and I covered the story at times during the year. That was my impression. It was very strong, and
Okay, let me ask you another question, Paul.
Yeah.
You say in your article of last Saturday, the Minister's information is based on the Garda file. And much of this information, in turn, comes from the Colombian authorities, whose reliability has been questioned by Irish critics. The Colombian authorities' reliability is being questioned in all corners of this universe. But Sam Smith on this programme the other day denied that his information, i.e. the information passed to him by the minister, had anything to do with Colombian intelligence or indeed the CIA. Now you're confirming that it did. How reliable are these Colombian authorities?
Well, obviously the bogus passport application form for an Irish passport would be an Irish document, and that would refer to what Sam Smith printed in his newspaper last month. Much of the rest of the information did inevitably, and that's what the minister stated in a statement to the Dáil, came from Colombia, about movement of people in that country. And so therefore it passed from the Colombian authorities to the Garda here, to the minister, and then into the public realm.
Fair to say, Paul.
I must say, no, can I make a general point again about faraway places? I do think that people are very quick to condemn practices in faraway countries. And it's much easier to be black and white about practices in faraway countries, because in this case I have no experience of Colombia. I don't speak Spanish. I haven't been to the country, and I assume you haven't either. When it comes to things that happen nearer to ground, it's much easier to get a better handle on things and to talk and get a more nuanced.
Well, let me refer you to a Senate report in Washington, which is damning of the Colombian government and successive Colombian governments. Every human rights organisation in the world is concerned about the Colombian government. So I'd say that it's pretty well sourced. I just want to ask you a final...
But Eamon, what about the FARC? I mean, condemn the Colombian government and their practices by all means, but what about the very well organised guerrilla group and their practices?
Let me tell you, Paul, when nobody was out in this town describing the IRA and Sinn Féin as terrorists, I was out for 15 years, so I don't need any lessons about standing up to terrorists. A final point, is it fair to say, Paul, and you refer again to this in your piece last Saturday, that the Gardaí, senior Gardaí, are the source of much of what's passing for fact in relation to Frank Connolly, and of course it is Frank Connolly who exposed Garda corruption, not just in Donegal, but in Dublin and elsewhere around this state.
Yes, I would say so, and that's my interpretation, and it's what's been driving this for many years. And the minister the present minister of Justice is a very strong character, but traditionally that department is run by the civil servants and by the Gardaí, because they're the permanent government. So he may be ideologically driven himself, and he may be strong, but he'd be very strongly influenced by the information that he's receiving from the guards and from civil servants.
Okay, Paul Cullen of the Irish Times, thank you very much for joining us on The Breakfast Show. It's coming up to 7:57. We're taking our break now, and our 8 o'clock